All right, gang. Howdy, howdy. Uh, Happy Wednesday. I hope everybody's doing well. It was nice seeing everybody on Monday. Um, so this is the transition lecture, and this is like one of the most impactful lectures that I've ever had. This is literally me passing a lecture that I had on to you. Everything else I've written and created on by myself, but this one there's not a lot of improvement I can do on this one. So I have to give credit where credit is due. This is uh, pretty directly taken from Anna Shapiro's transition lecture. Anna Shapiro was the head of the program at Northwestern when I went through and got my MFA. She is currently the artistic director of Steppenwolf. She won a Tony for August Osage County. Um, uh, I was lucky enough to learn under her. I got to assistant direct her with Of Mice and Men on Broadway, the one with Franco and O'Dowd. She's a powerhouse. So if you don't know her, look her up. She's fantastic. And her really claim is transitions. I think she's directing a musical now, but she doesn't direct musicals typically, but she's approached to quite often. And the reason that she's approached to direct musicals, even though that's not what her name is. In fact, she's directing. It's in pre-production now. The Devil Wears Prada. Yeah, that's going to be up on Broadway on the other side of this quarantine, I assume. But in any case, people approach her for musicals because her plays move so beautifully. So this is all about how your play is going to move, and the transitions are what make the play move the way it does. So they are one of the most important aspects of the delivery system. They are the mode of transportation from one moment to the next. Yeah. Um, the transitions happen in a narrative rest, and that allows for the most imprinting on the audience, right? So you've got your play, but the narrative of your play stops at the end of a scene, picks up at the next scene, and in between is that narrative rest, and this allows for the most imprinting, right? So the most important thing is you have to think about what you want of your audience, what you want them to do, what you want them to sit with, what you want them to experience, what you want them to transition from and to. It is the most dangerous moment of the play because there is a possibility for losing them completely. But because it's the most dangerous moment, it is the biggest opportunity you have as a director to imprint your own point of view onto the play. And it's the most dangerous moment because I think I've mentioned this before, and I imagine we've all been in the audience watching a play, and the scene ends, and the lights go down, almost all the way, but not quite. And then we see shadows on the stage, and we hear the scuffling of furniture and the shuffling of feet, and maybe a little bit of music over top to try to hide it, but never enough. And then after too long of a pause, the lights come up and the scene goes on. It kills the storytelling. There's just it stops. It literally, the storytelling stops. And even if it's for a minute, it feels like 10, and then it starts again, as opposed to the storytelling continuing through the transition and into the next scene. So what you want to ask yourself way before you ask yourself where the set pieces go, where the actors go, what technically has to happen, what mechanically has to happen. Ask yourself what happens to the audience. Yeah. Do they stay in the same place physically, but move emotionally? So in other words, not in their seats, but do they stay in the same scene storytelling wise, but while one scene ends on a melancholic note, the next scene is going to begin on a celebratory note. So are we going to move the audience from the melancholy to the celebratory, right? Recognize that. Does it stay in the same place emotionally, but move physically? So it ends on that melancholic note in a classroom, but then the next scene is going to start on that melancholic note in a park, right? Are we moving emotionally? Are we moving physically? These are the basic the only things that can happen, right? So what happens to the audience? And then what do you want the audience to do while they are making that move? What elements of the scene are most important? What elements of the scene 1 is most important and scene 2 is most important, right? And these are the elements that we're paying attention to. Location, what is being said or the language, and character. Who is there? And what elements then drive the change from one scene to the next? Let's just talk. As an example, let's do transitions led by location versus character. Yeah. So I talked about this play in I think it was the last class, I think, or last lecture. Anyway, I assistant directed East of Eden at Steppenwolf. Terry Kinney directed, one of the founders of Steppenwolf, and it was. I mean, it's sweeping, right? It's this huge Steinbeck novel that covers a large amount of time. He skipped book 1, I think, started at book 2, but and the set, they put a ton of money into the set. I think this was clearly something they wanted to take to Broadway, which did not end up happening. It was moderately successful, I think, the play, and I have lots of opinions. But this was the one where that the floor went down so slowly and then came up so slowly, and the transitions became all about this effing floor going down and up and down and up. And then they had these huge platform sets that would come on, like this intricate living room that would come on and then go off, and this intricate office would come on and go off. And the transitions, as it had been designed, and as I imagine Terry and Walt, the set designer, had talked about, were driven by location. Location was going to be the most important thing. It was this location was moving into this location. And that just doesn't hold for very long. Locations leading your transition, they're inanimate. And this is not 100%, right? There's an exception to every rule, and I'm sure there's some location that could beautifully morph into another location, and that's going to be your location leading through transition, and that can happen. But when you're talking about a bedroom moving into an office, or the interior moving into the exterior of a house, maybe the first time, because it's kind of stage magic and you're watching it happen, but once it's happened and you're going to have to watch it again, those transitions are going to get slower and slower from the audience's point of view in watching. Like I told you, the fix, and this was Anna walking into the rehearsal room, watching this transition and going, no. You have to figure out how you layer your transition, right? So you're going to layer your location, your words, and your character. So there was a scene. We were leading into a scene with Kathy, who's one of the main characters. And it was into her room, and it was this long transition that was happening. It was just killing. We had it beautiful. It was live cello and harp music up in the upper audience, playing beautifully, but it was just so long. And as soon as Anna came in, she said, "What you need to do is you need to lead this. You need this transition to lead with character. So you need her to come in, walk slowly across the stage in all of her kind of regalness and Kathy attitude, if you know the book. And the spotlight is on her. And then by the time she reaches the other side of the stage, then the lights start coming up, so then that's location. So the character is leading it, then the location comes up, and then they start speaking the words. So you've layered that transition. The most important part of that transition was character. That's what you want the audience to come into the scene with, because this was going to be a big confrontational showdown with Kathy. So you wanted to see Kathy come in and know all you need to know about this character before she hits the end, and then the lights come up, and it's her domain, and then the words start, and then you're in the scene. And that's what I mean by layering the transition. Figuring out what your priority is, what you want the audience to be with, and how you want to move them either emotionally or physically or both. And then you can layer the other elements: location, words, character. Character, location, words. And that's one way to do it. I would say a lot of the time, probably more than 50%, you're going to want to lead with character. If you're talking about, I don't know, most plays I'm attracted to are plays that are dealing with the complexity of human beings, yeah? So I'm going to feel like I want to lead with character in those situations. But there are certain, I'm going to blank on them now, but there are certainly plays in which you'd want that location to lead, or plays in which perhaps they're both leading at the same time, but you want to figure out how to layer them. And we can talk about it. I'm sure there will be questions about this, so just please write them down, send them to me, and we'll talk them out. So once you know what you want the audience to do, what you want them to be with, be it character, location, or language. And once you know the order, the layer of how you want to do it, then you got to figure out how you're going to do this. So what is the theatrical vocabulary that you have that can make that happen, right? Is there magic? It's fun if there is, right? Or is it strict reality? Are you strictly dealing with reality, and that's the realm that you have to deal with? What is made possible by the text that you have? And then, is it necessary to stay in the same vocabulary? Now, this is where I was going over this transition and going, oh my God, because this is Hedda. This is exactly where I ended up with Hedda. I decided that it was not necessary to stay within within reality, because Ibsen is very much, he's the father of realism, so that's his world. But I wanted to bring magic into it. I wanted to crack those transitions open, and the way that you can do that is by letting character lead. I let Hedda lead those transitions because it's the internal, right? I started telling the story of the internal Hedda, and this all led back to my point of view of trying to create Hedda as a full person, as Hedda in all her complexities. Hedda, yes, the dangerous, the manipulative, the violent, but also Hedda, the scared, the playful, the hopeful. And so I wanted to tell the story that I didn't feel like was totally being told within the narrative of the text in the transitions. And I wanted to do that by showing her internal side. And once I had that, I knew I could create a new language within the transitions, outside of the language of the play. So that's how I decided to do it. But is there magic? Is it only reality? What's given to you by the text? And can you break the rules in the transitions? That's not to say breaking the rule. I'm sure there are various opinions about the Hedda transitions, and it doesn't always work. But it can be really fun. I found it to be really fun. So when you are thinking about your play, and you're trying to, at the very beginning, you need to think about how it's going to move at the very beginning. You want to think about your play in these terms. You think about locations, character, time, and musicality. When you're thinking about your transitions. Location. Is it a single location, like Fool for Love? Is it multiple locations, like Playground Injuries? Or is it sweeping, right? Like East of Eden or Grapes of Wrath? Characters. Do they have the same value or different values? So do you have, I would say, let's see, aliens, I would say they generally have the same value, those characters. I would say Gruesome Playground has the same value. I would say Fool for Love has different values. I would say Martin and the dad has different values than Eddie and May. Hedda, I would say different values. So time, is it chronological? Aliens, totally chronological with passages of time. Playground injuries, absolutely not chronological. Fool for Love, chronological with passages of time. And musicality. What are the length of the scenes and what are the number of the scenes? Because the transitions are going to affect what the musicality of the scenes already are, right? So if the playwright has written a bunch of short, choppy scenes, and you decide to make transitions that are like 3 minutes long each, you're probably effing the musicality of that play completely, yeah? But if you have longer scenes, I mean, Hedda's scenes are long. Because there's 4 in there. There's 4 acts and there's 4 scenes. And so the transitions could be a little beefier. And they weren't that bad, but they could be a little bit beefier. So when thinking about your play, think about it in terms of, okay, I got a single location with different value characters with a chronological, and the musicality is super short and choppy. And then that's going to give you a sense of what your transitions are going to do. So if you have characters all of the same value, then you have so many opportunities for who leads what transition, yeah? Different values. I mean, Hedda was the only person that was going to lead my transitions, especially once I defined them as what I did. But it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to have Tessman lead a transition because my point of view is not about Tessman. The play is not about Tessman, right? Especially since there's only 3 transitions. So these things are going to affect how you think about your transitions. So really, when you think about your play, think about each of these 4 terms. Yeah? I hope that makes sense. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is contract. This has become huge for me, and I think about it a lot, especially when I'm adapting, because I have a lot more freedom to kind of play, right? But with Hedda, I thought about it quite a bit. So, what is the contract? And interestingly, well, I'll do this and then I'll do it the other way around. So, what is the contract? What is your top of show? Your audience is going to be imprinted with your contract in 30 seconds to a minute. So that's not a lot of play. That's literally what's your pre-show, what's your preset, what's your sound, what do they walk in here the first time, what does house to half look like, what does house out look like, what does the sound like, and then maybe the first 15 seconds of the the play, maybe. And I can't emphasize enough your house. Like, I mean, I've been with lighting designers, and they're like, "Oh, here's house in, or here's house out, half house out, house in, or play in." Okay, now to the first cue. I'm like, "Whoa, that's not you've skipped 3 cues. We got to go back. Let me see the preset. Let me see house out." I get every time. The last however many times I've worked with a designer, the house out has been too quick, just too quick, because it was functional and not aesthetic, not a choice. A choice was not being made, yeah, and that's insanely important. Okay, so you're making a choice with everything, and the very beginning, arguably, is the most important choices you're making because you're setting yourself up. So whatever you use in that first minute of your play is going to give you the tools of what you can use for the rest of the play, especially in the transitions, right? Because you're transitioning from no story into story, yeah? I mean, it's like the first credits of Star Wars, the first thing of Star Wars, where you read the da-da-da-da, and you read all the stuff, and then you see a big ship in space. And, like, Matilda's going through the Star Wars right now, and she's on it. Like, she knows the galaxy far, far away, long ago, far, far away. She knows that by heart. She knows when Star Wars comes on, she has us read the thing, and then she's like, "Oh, and now it's going to be a spaceship." That has set her up for the rest of the movie. So that first minute is insanely important. I often think about it as an opening gesture, and the opening gesture being the first transition into the show. And I want to make sure, especially when I'm building a show, I want to make sure that whatever I'm using in there is going to set the audience up for what I'm using later. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact tool, but it's going to be the tool. Like, I'm going to tell a story through my lighting cue. I'm going to tell a story through my sound cue. I'm going to tell a story, by the way, what you see first, right? If you see the character enter and then you see the location and then they start talking, that's how I'm going to tell the story. That doesn't mean that these tools can't evolve, can't get bigger, can't get smaller over the course of the play, but it means these are the tools in your toolbox. And if you start out in the middle of Act 2 with a tool that you haven't used up until now, your audience is going to get right out, story's gone, and you've lost them. Yeah? So the beginning's super, super important. Now, that being said, I think I've said before, sometimes you need to work from your biggest moment and what you're going to do, how you're going to tackle that. And so when I approached Hedda, I actually started at the end. And how am I going to tell the story of the suicide? Once I figured the basic mechanics of that out, basically where she was going to be and the rose petals, then I went, okay, great. Those are the tools I need. So now I need to work backwards through the transitions, using those tools in different ways and at different levels, so that my audience, by the time we get there, is totally knows it, understands it, doesn't need help with it. Knowing that, like, the first transition, the dance with the duels, and I've said this before, was going to be a little disorienting, and that's fine. As we heard from Beauregard, disorientation is wonderful. It can draw an audience in at the beginning. But they're going to understand it more as they go along the play. And so when I came to the very top of the show, it is the simplest transition of all, there's no doubt. And it's the one that doesn't really have magic to it, other than an eerie presence, other than an eerie relationship between Hedda and the room, which was very important. But it had music, the Bob Dylan piece, which was important to set up the rest of the music throughout the course of the play. And in fact, we ended with a Bob Dylan piece, but sung by Roberta Flack. We went from a more masculine voice into the more feminine voice, which was purposeful for Hedda. But it set up the usage of Bowie and Floyd to come. And we set up the space, and we set up relationships Hedda had with various pieces of the space, specifically the fire, the guns, the window, and the piano. And then whether everybody caught it or not, the very last thing she does is she touches her belly, and then she leaves, a nod towards the pregnancy that is there. So that was the first couple minutes, but that was the opening gesture of the show that set up all the tools that I was going to use in the transitions to come. So, to wrap it up, how does the play move? And that is what your transitions are. And this is everything. How does the play move? Your point of view can, and I would argue should, lie in this, which is why you're working on this from the very beginning. Again, my point of view of Hedda's complexity was then the story was told further throughout how it moved, throughout these bursts of internal character leading transitions. And finally, most importantly, this is the beginning choice. This is a choice that you should be making, frankly, with around now with y'all's plays, with your first thoughts and moving into your point of view, or your first day address, which is your solidified point of view. You should be thinking about the play in this way. So thinking about how many locations is it, and thinking about value of characters, and thinking about time passing, whether it's chronological or not. and thinking about the musicality of your piece. Now you're going to be adapting these pieces into a much smaller piece that contain the whole piece. Even those of you that picked a 10-minute play, you're going to be shrinking it, less than half. And those that you picked a large, a normal full-length play are going to be reducing it incredibly, which is why you need to know the story so well. But think about the transitions. We don't lose this because we're not going to do this in class. You will very much have transitions in your toy theater piece, and you're going to have to make choices between in how you do that transition. Yeah, it will essentially be, it'll be taking your fable and telling that fable of a story within this box, making choices about characters, making choices about framing, making choices about background, foreground, middle ground, making choices about transitions. How are you going to transition from one scene into the next? Is it as simple as two people are talking and it's going to come and they come down and then two people are going to enter from over here, right? So maybe that's character leading transition, or maybe it's comes down and over here, right? So we can talk more about this on Monday, and I'm sure that we should. But please, 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 any questions about this, send them to me. Think about this in relation to what you're working on and send them to me. You may have a piece that happens all in one place, one time, lights never go up, lights never go down. I know at least one of the 10-minute plays is like that. You still got to transition into the play and out of the play, right? So your transitions are still going to be there. They're just going to be in and out. So think about this in relation to your piece. Think about this in relation to your piece in relation to the box that we're going to perform them in. So get me 3 questions, 1 to 3 questions, 1 to 3 thoughts based on this lecture, and read. I believe it's Embarrassment, Bogart, for Monday, and we'll do some breakouts on that. And you will have your first thoughts to me by the time you get this video, and I will try to get those back really quickly, just like I did last week. And we'll move on from there. I do want to next week, we'll do a little kind of touching base, like we've gone a few weeks in this format and we have a few more weeks to go. How is that going to look like? Yeah. So great. I'm available. Let me know. Be well, be safe, and I'll see y'all soon.